Hey, Fringe listeners, my friend Gretchen Schott is one passionate lady, and she's got big fire for results-oriented leadership and adult learning. I'm passing the mic to Gretchen today as she shares one of her favorite episodes of her podcast, Made for Impact. I bet you're going to want to follow the show after you hear this.
There are leaders in the world who are made for impact.
Learning is the most future-proof skill. A human who knows how to learn has way more future-proofing than someone who is not an adept learner.
Rachel Romer is making an impact.
I'm Gretchen Schott, and this is Made for Impact, a show for leaders who want to leave a lasting impact on their organizations, their teams, and their lives.
Rachel Romer is the CEO and co-founder of Guild Education, a company that provides education and upskilling programs for employees. Over the last year, Guild Education, the career opportunity platform, has brought together more than 5 million working adults from a variety of industries, including healthcare, retail, financial services, and with hundreds of educational institutions, learning partners, and large employers, including Walmart, Disney, Target, and Macy's, they are truly making an impact. I was impressed with their mission and the statement Rachel has in her LinkedIn profile. She states, "Our businesses grow when adult working learners succeed, and our mission is to unlock opportunity for America's workforce." I think you're really going to enjoy what Rachel has to share. Take a listen. Rachel, thank you so much for being a part of our show at Made for Impact. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur and how you co-founded Guild Education.
Yeah, it isn't a particularly linear journey, though. When I think so often they're not. We just tell stories that make things sound retrospectively rational. So I bet that's the case for more people than we know. But I think I was always fairly entrepreneurial. I just grew up in a landscape where I saw that entrepreneurship most often in the public sector or in small businesses and family operated organizations that were much, much smaller. So I had virtually no exposure to Silicon Valley, and I actually didn't even pay attention to it for my first few years of living in the Bay Area. It took actually landing feet first into a social enterprise after undergrad and realizing that the private sector was also a place to do entrepreneurial things, which is a backwards way because everybody else comes the opposite direction. But I had seen entrepreneurship in government, and which is, too often not talked about. And this problem I really wanted to solve, which is, helping the 100 million Americans who are the base of the pyramid of our economy, who haven't completed college or a formal credential and don't have the skills to be resilient to and through their retirement age, and who don't have a great shot at a family sustaining seat in the middle class. I slowly realized that that was actually a harder problem to solve alone in just the public sector or as a nonprofit. And I was increasingly convinced that you could do it as a venture-backed organization, but specifically for me as a B Corp, and really straddling the public, private, and nonprofit landscape to solve this inextractable problem that's been so difficult for so long. And we're chipping away at it. So my founding story comes at it a different way.
Talk a little bit about your upbringing and kind of what inspired this passion that you have for helping others and especially helping those who maybe haven't been given the same types of resources to be able to help themselves.
Yeah, so I was born into a lot of privilege, though that word is often a synonym for wealth. And for me, it had more to do with power and impact. But my grandfather was governor of Colorado the day I was born, and he served for the first 10 years of my life. And my parents were fairly active in our community. Some might call civic activists. For example, they sent me to a school 20 minutes from our house. I took the bus when Denver was still under court-ordered busing, but most of the kids in my neighborhood went to a private school. And their choice around that was I had already figured out the nuts and bolts of the things you'll learn in kindergarten from an academic perspective. And my parents sort of viewed that the social learning and learning about the world was more important than whether or not it was the very best kindergarten from an academic mindset. So, I was the only kid in my class often who brought a lunch. All the other kids in my class were on free and reduced lunch programs funded by the federal government. And so, my first entrepreneurial moment came when I was 6, and the federal government was threatening to cut that program holistically. And I knew that was the only way a lot of my friends ate lunch, and actually often breakfast were those funded meals. There was a large housing project across the street from our school, so most of my friends lived there. I learned that how those programs, my parents explained to me that Congress funds those programs and this is how it works. And some folks are for that and some are against that. And so started writing letter campaigns to Newt Gingrich and asked my grandpa to deliver them on his next trip to DC. And so that was just the lens through which I saw you solve problems. I really saw government as a tool for both solving problems and sometimes maybe from my view, creating problems. My 6-year-old self might have said that is the most formative piece. But my dad is one of 7 and my mom is one of 9. So the other wrinkle in that's really powerful for me is that my grandfather paid for my dad and his 6 siblings all to go to college, and then actually had saved enough for all 22 of us grandkids on that side of the family to go to college debt free. And that was a huge gift and let me do a bunch of cool things in my 20s, like work unpaid for the Obama campaign and start my own company at 26. But my cousins on the other side of the family mostly didn't go to college. And that worked out fine for my mom's generation, where there were lots of great union jobs or great middle class jobs that didn't require a college degree. But for my generation, another 21 cousins on that side, I saw these brilliant, really brilliant family members of mine struggle way more than they ought to, but for one reason, which is that they didn't have an affordable path to the skilling that would move them into a really stable middle class right in their 20s versus cobble and struggle their way into that in their 30s and 40s. So those are the 2 most formative pieces of my upbringing that shaped me today.
So Rachel, this is so interesting. I love how intersections happen. So I grew up in Colorado. And so I did not realize that your grandfather was the governor. I of course remember him. I grew up there. I knew all of that. Oh my goodness. That is so fun. That's so great. So you might have touched on this a little bit. I just want to invite a little bit more conversation about Guild Education. So what inspired you to create Guild Education and then upskilling opportunities for employees? I mean, you talked a little bit about your family, but are there other factors that kind of brought that forth?
So everything I just talked about is sort of the personal side. On the professional side, I spent time, as mentioned, in social enterprises. I worked in a number of community colleges around the US, helping, and this was in 2008, 9, 10, when a lot of the folks showing up at community college were really high aptitude, had nothing to do with their grades or capabilities, but their families had been hit by the Great Recession, and they didn't have money to go to the 4-year universities that would have accepted them, just charged too much. And so really thinking about, is our system designed to help those folks go into the middle class dream that I think is so often the root of the American story? And what I learned is the answer was no. I think much of our systems, both our community colleges, our 4-year institutions, so much of the fabric of American skilling and higher ed was built for the 1940s and 50s, when we had lots of young men returning from war and upskilling for that next chapter of the economy. And they really worked for that. I want to name, it was a great system for that. And not to say there aren't great community colleges today. In fact, at Guild, we work with lots of them. But the system has had a hard time evolving to meet up. And I'd argue so have the elite schools, right? This incredibly expensive product that sort of can feel a bit like an expensive coming of age experience more than an education, right? With, you think about the whole product of college. Why is it so expensive? The dorms, the swimming pools, the expensive faculty model, the food, when for our learner, the 100 million Americans I want to serve, when our average learner is 32, she's a mom. When you ask her what she wants skills. She's hiring college for skills. And so it just felt like the system wasn't working for this next economy, for the 21st century or the 4th industrial revolution or whatever you want to call it that we're entering into right now. Felt like we weren't exactly set up to succeed. And so I wanted to figure out, how do you better connect all of these systems I had seen together? How do you connect the employers that employ the 100 million Americans today that work? They're already in the workforce. They're not 17. They're already in jobs. They know those jobs aren't resilient. They can't stand on their feet for 50 years. They don't want to be a cashier their entire career. They want to have career pathways the way we do in some sectors, but not in others. And so I just got obsessed with the idea of bringing these systems together. And Guild is ultimately a three-sided model that brings together employers, the frontline American workforce, and the best skilling providers, which are sometimes colleges, but increasingly certificate providers, boot camps, apprenticeship models, you name it, that are going to prepare people in a debt-free way to have a chance at the middle class.
Yeah. Speak a little bit more about your thoughts or your philosophy with regards to path, because in my role, I often get asked to help develop leaders, develop managers in a prescriptive way. Like, give me a path. Like, tell me what the path is. And often when I hear that, it's like, tell me all the things that I have to do so that I can make more money, so that I can get the promotion, right? And I struggle with that word path sometimes, because some of those things, especially when we talk about leadership, there isn't like, you do these 5 things and, oh my gosh, you're a leader, you're amazing. Or, oh, now you're ready to manage people. There's so many nuances that go with that. And how do you quantify that? That's kind of where I struggle with the idea of, give me a path. How do you approach that with kind of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Great question. First of all, I think we taught people a bunch of models that don't really work. So the idea of a career ladder or a career path is really broken because it's not linear. We talk a lot about the career lattice. So if you picture a fence, sometimes you're going to move diagonally on that. Sometimes that diagonal is going to point upwards. Sometimes you're going to take a step back in terms of your responsibility, the number of people you manage, maybe your salary or your hourly wage, in order to get on another line and take 2 steps up one day. I think so much of that is rooted also in the idea of what we call the 4 and 40. You were supposed to go to college for 4 years and then work for 40 and retire. Our economy isn't shaped that way anymore. We know the average skill has a shelf life of less than 5 years. And that means we're going to need to do what we call the every 4, which is we're all going to have to be reskilling and learning new tools and competencies every 4 years. And so if you're designing for the every 4, you really want to help people understand how to navigate that lattice and how to have their hands and feet in different places too, right? It's not as though you stand on one part of the ladder and there you are, you made it. I think the second thing you hit on when talking about management and leadership is those are way more about competencies than skills. And whether you're getting skills from a classic college classroom or on the job or in a L&D environment with a learning and development teacher within your workforce, or you name it. We have a lot more concepts about how to teach skills, but more importantly, we over-index there because we know how to measure them. We're really uncomfortable with what we can't measure. But competencies like self-awareness and learner's mindset or collaboration, because those are harder to measure, we don't talk about them. We don't teach them. But when you're hiring for a people manager, when you're looking at 8 great employees who do a job and you're picking who should be the leader of those 8, the best person often isn't the best people manager. Those are 2 wildly different sets of skills and competencies. And so I think the shift we're having to make in this knowledge economy is we're going to have to figure out how to measure and teach competencies versus just skills. And I think that's important because that's the humanness, right? In this era of everybody saying, is AI going to replace all our jobs? I won't profess to say that I know exactly what AI is going to do. And I think anybody who does is probably BSing a little bit. But I do know 2 things, which is that learning is the most future-proof skill. A human who knows how to learn has way more future-proofing than someone who is not an adept learner. And I know that leadership and management and the human capabilities and competencies that sit under that are going to be a lot harder to automate in a robot than the skills of a lot of the hard skills and tactical parts of the job. So when I'm advising somebody, I really talk to them about 1, flexing their learning muscles, both on an EQ and IQ basis, and 2, building out those competencies that will make them limber on their career lattice.
Yeah, I love that. In the work that I'm doing, I've developed called it leadership pathways. And we have 6 competencies that overlay these pathways. When you talked about the lattice, I love it because there's a fundamental philosophy that I talk about. And I believe that leadership is not management. Leadership is about influence and management is about authority. So if you want to go into that path, then you're choosing to be in authority types of relationships and work on skills and competencies around that versus I can be a leader and not have direct reports and I'm still contributing and I'm using my influence and I'm developing my expertise, right? And so as I've created this model, which, kind of looks like a ladder. I liked the metaphor of like chutes and ladders, the game, where there may be times where like you're climbing up that ladder, but then all of a sudden your time in that job or the skills that what got you there isn't getting you there. And the value that you place on the work you do shifts. And so now you're on the slide, you're shooting down to the bottom because you've got to climb that ladder again of value, times, and skills and pivot. So I loved your metaphor of lattice. And I was like, that's just like my chutes and ladders metaphor.
Yes, exactly. And how do we help people feel like the shoot can be fun, even though we've gotten so hierarchical in our thinking? Yeah.
Well, and for too long, it was like, you got to be climbing. I talk about this a lot too, where we are in this culture of consumption. I need to get more. And we're not doing enough with it. What is the point of consumption? It's to take and to get more. And there are some times where we don't need to be consuming. We just need to live in that moment and practice that out, live it out. There isn't any more knowledge that you need to get. You just need to do that a whole bunch of times. And the experience you get from a different customer or a different person or a different environment is the learning that happens. And I can't write that skill necessarily for you. That's just time and job, which can be frustrating for young, eager people that want to grow, right? I love it. Could you share some success stories or some examples from of how Guild has, and is it Guild or Guild Education? I want to make sure I'm saying it right.
Yeah, we go by Guild now. We used to be Guild Education. And then as we expanded into more skilling and career mobility solutions, we decided that Guild was a better capture of all the things we do.
Awesome. Okay, so share some success stories or examples from Guild and how you've transformed like lives and careers of individuals through your programming.
Yeah, that's the stuff that gets me up out of bed every morning. I was just talking to teammates this morning who were at a Chipotle last night and happened to meet the manager who's completing her degree with us in business management and really gaining a lot of competencies around her leadership of that store, but also thinking about what it might look like for her to one day run her own restaurant and building out other skill sets that may serve her beyond her time at Chipotle. So I get one of those, nearly every day, which is really powerful. And, 97% of the learners we serve go back to school entirely debt-free. That includes not just tuition, but books and fees and labs. And then, we're doing everything we can to get that number to 100% with employers by including even more in what they do. So often those stories are even better because we heroize the graduation moments and, we just got out of graduation season, but we often don't talk about like, what is the burden we're putting on the back as we put on that cap and gown, what is also getting placed in the heavy backpack to go pay off that debt. And so I'm always thrilled. But the big picture of what we want to accomplish is we want to help folks have that clear pathway and pathways with a big S on it of advancing their careers. And so the things we measure that we care most about is thinking about one, internal mobility. So we meet all of our learners at work, right? They already have jobs, but often in entry-level roles. And what we know is that our learners are 2.2 times more likely to be promoted internally than their peers who have the same job title and are in the same role. With that, we see a 2.4x higher increase in wages for our learners compared to their peers. And at companies like Chipotle, the crew member, the entry-level role, the folks in the crew who partner with us and use our platform are 6x more likely to advance into a managerial job than their peers who don't take advantage of our platform. So like that's the volume and the scale of what we do that gets me up every morning.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So meaningful. So amazing. I want to dig a little bit further into some of what you touched on. And my question is, how do you see the future of work? and the role of education and upskilling and helping individuals adapt to a changing job market.
I think this might be the challenge of our lifetime because, right alongside things like there's other, I should be clear, there's other existential things. Like I'd love to see fewer wars in the war. I'd love to have a release and poverty and climate. But like, from a developed world perspective, it's right up there. And I think what is going to be so discombobulating for folks is the fast disintegration of that 4 and 40 story, or the idea that whatever you learn in your teens and early 20s is going to be enough to sustain you through retirement age. That is just completely inaccurate at this point in the labor market. And it might even speed up faster than that every 4 that I talked about. But at the very least, we know folks need to become lifelong learners. And we don't have a system set up for that, right? Our higher ed system certainly is not set up for that. We're working to reform that, but our jobs are also not set up for that. Our companies haven't thought of that as their responsibility. You look back at how benefits have accumulated. The reason employers started offering benefits was to compete with the government, because government jobs included benefits in the 40s, and private sector had a hard time competing then in that era, which now feels sort of ironic given the wage disparities we see today in the private and public sector. But that was the game. I think learning is going to become a differentiator of the best companies. I think the best companies are going to be places where you can learn, because folks are going to realize, gosh, I don't just want to be in a job that I'm doing the same thing day in, day out. I want to be learning on that job, and I want to be learning around that job so that I'm resilient in the economy. And I think, AI and automation are really sparking that conversation, but there's a ton of other trends related to just the broader knowledge economy that we're walking into. And so helping everyone become a resilient learner is a steep challenge, and it's steeper than I think we often feel comfortable talking about. So 54% of Americans read over the age of 18, read at a 6th grade or less reading level. 54%, right? We need all those folks to be stronger readers before they can be stronger basic learners, before they can be stronger complex learners. And that's not to say these folks don't have an immense amount of skills. Like, there are skills come in so many forms and fashions, and reading is not the only pathway to skills, but being a great reader is the pathway to most knowledge economy skills. And so people talk about truck driving all the time, and that one's got a little while longer, but let me tell you a job that's going to go fast: cashier. We have over 5 million folks in America whose title today is cashier, and that job is going away rapidly. Now, what you have to then do with that cashier is you have to look at them not just for their skills, like, okay, they used a machine, but for their competencies. Were they really strong at customer service? Were they really strong at problem solving? Okay, well, let me tell you a job that requires a lot of customer service and problem solving: mid-level healthcare roles, because bedside manner and customer service are actually 2 sides of the same coin. They just happen, one in a restaurant and one in a hospital room. So then the question is, okay, what hard skills are missing? So how do we take a percentage of those cashiers and skill them into being phlebotomists, into being medical assistants? And then how do we put them on the pathway to become nurses and to take on other roles? And so, that's the existential problem that I think we're going to have to solve in lots of parts of the economy, is watching for where the jobs are going to go away, and then paying attention to how we reskill and upskill those populations into jobs of the future.
I love it. So many good nuggets in there. If a business owner was listening to our conversation right now, and specifically with what you just said about paying attention to the jobs to be done and the jobs that are going away, what advice would you give for business owners now to be getting in front of this in the future?
I think the first is hire for a learning mindset. That's the number one competency that I look for when I'm hiring, but it's also the one that I see most successfully of the companies that are really adapting to the future of work. You can meet anyone anywhere on their learning journey, whether that's, somebody who is just mastering English, or somebody who is taking their second graduate school credential to become better at data analytics and data science. What matters actually more than how far they've gotten is how nimble and how they believe in themselves as learners. Because there's plenty of people who've graduated from the Ivy League who have very fixed mindsets. They're like, I was born smart, I am smart, I have what it took, so I got all the grades and I'm done learning. That is very common. I know a lot of that community. So this is not about grades and privilege and pedigree. It's actually really about, do they believe in themselves as a learner? Because the folks who view themselves as learners are going to be your best employees, because when things change, when the new technology gets mainstream, when our jobs are disrupted, when our businesses need to transform, those learning employees who really are capable and have that self-belief and that mindset are going to quickly be able to pivot much faster than the employees who think, I am this very fixed mindset about what their skills are. So that's the top thing I think, a small or medium-sized business leader can do. And that's what I try to do at Guild. My team's about 1,300 here. I think for big corporations, they get to take an added challenge of, if I ran, a massive company, thinking about, how do I take the employees I have today and reskill them for jobs I need tomorrow? Because we're entering, even though it doesn't quite feel like it right now with some of the recessionary environment, we're entering a pretty severe labor shortage in the United States, and more importantly, a skills shortage within that labor. This is not China, where there are millions of college graduates who the only job available to them is back in a rural community where they can't use knowledge economy skills. We don't have enough knowledge economy workers. And we, for lots of reasons, are hoping that that talent comes from within. We're not currently practicing an immigration policy that lets enough of that talent come externally. And so we got to solve this problem. It's in the constraints we're in. We've got to upskill more talent. So if I were a corporate leader, I would be thinking about it that way too.
When you talk about learning mindset, do you mean growth mindset? Are they the same thing for you?
Yeah, that's our nickname for growth mindset. Growth mindset is the macro concept about, your self efficacy in terms of that belief. And then I think learning mindset is that is sort of a segment of it around learning new content, learning new skills, learning new capabilities.
Yeah. You're speaking into my heart, right? I've been in L&D for lots of years, so I get you. I feel everything. I'm picking up everything you're putting down.
Well, as you know, you and I are unfortunately in somewhat of a minority, because for so long we built a system that was very fixed and that really tried to grade people, rank them, place them into jobs, a bit as though there were always going to be an officer class and an infantry class, right? Like that's how we built everything, and that's not going to work for the new, flatter, not less hierarchical knowledge economy.
Well, and I think the other challenge with that too is that there's this belief that like we just need to train them. Like that's the silver bullet. Just train them and then they'll just be better. And it's like it's not just go to this class. Like, and even if that was the case, even if there was a class for every single thing that you could possibly need, you have to put the environment in place to allow them to learn, retain, and practice that. Like if they're in my class and you're calling them and asking them, like, when are you done? Like you're not allowing them to learn. If you're, sending them to the class, but you're like, it's a really bad time. Could you, instead of taking 3 hours, could you do that in like an hour and then come back? Like none of those things support that either. So
absolutely. Absolutely. We call it learning and development, but oftentimes the orgs are actually given a remit that is tactical training and compliance. And so if we really want to have learning and development departments, we have to organize the system around learning.
Around it. I love it. I love it. What are challenges you've encountered while building and scaling Guild, and how you've overcome them?
How much more time do we have? Gosh, I feel like every challenge. COVID was a challenge for every leader. We were 400 employees in March on the day we shut down the office, but all in Denver. We were simultaneously processing our first acquisition. That was a San Francisco-based organization with a small New York headquarters, and that was going to take us from 400 to 500 overnight. And we had thought we'd prepared for that. And then just, obviously like every other organization, suddenly we're asked to build an entirely new organizational way of working and structures and practices, all based from our homes and our computers. Doing that as we crossed that pivotal moment of 500 employees, when I look back, was really a seismic challenge because, I believe in a lot of the leadership theory that's based around studying how we organized as tribes or as groups of humans well before the corporate entity. And I do believe there are certain behaviors of a group of 50, a group of 150, a group of, 450 to 500, and that tripling factor, the whole body of the group and the organization really changes. And at 500, you stop knowing most people. And when that happens, you stop inherently trusting and you need explicit trust built in the system versus implicit trust. And when it was, less than 400 of us all in Denver every day, all in the same headquarters, there was so much implicit trust in our system. And suddenly we were bringing in 100 employees who had never met us, couldn't meet us because we were all trapped in our homes. And then together we were walking through a really turbulent summer of 2020, both as a business and as a culture, a global culture with COVID, a United States culture with George Floyd's murder. I mean, there were just layers on layers on layers of complexity for people. That really tested me as a learner and a leader. I made a lot of mistakes, tested a lot of things. Some worked, some didn't. I had a lot of the most doubts I had as a leader. And luckily, my board was really supportive and kind of gave me the atta girl, even when I hinted at maybe I'm not the right leader for this next chapter. Maybe it's time for you all to hire a CEO, one of those professional hired guns. And luckily they rejected that suggestion and gave me a lot of support and helped me double down on my coaching and the resources around me to scaffold me as a leader. But that was a really trying time for me.
Yeah. What are some future projects or things that you're super excited about with the work that you're doing with Guild?
I'm most excited about our shift into career mobility because our vision and mission statement has always been about unlocking economic opportunity for the American workforce through education and skilling. And now we're really getting to build more. We've earned the right by, in these 8 years doing a lot of the education and skilling work, we've now earned the right to do a lot more work around that economic opportunity and the career mobility for the learners we've served. And so I'm spending a lot of time and my team is spending a lot of time innovating on what are those products and services that need to sit around skilling so that once you've acquired the skills to move up in your career, you have the self-belief, you have the network, you have the social capital, you have the occupational identity to believe in all the things you're now capable of, the networking skills, the way to make your resume. I mean, all these things that it's kind of a game, right? Moving up in careers is sort of a game. And some people get more of the know-how and the playbooks of how to play that game based on the communities they live in. And we're trying to democratize that.
Yeah, I love it. If people are listening to our conversation and they're really excited and they want to be a part of Guild or they want to talk with you more about this, what's the best way for them to get engaged with you?
Guild.com. We've got a spot on there to reach out to us if you run a corporation or an organization that you think might benefit from this approach to helping, all of your employees have access to skilling and career mobility. We also have a career site on there, as well as a way for learning partners, those who are providing innovative skilling programs and boot camps and apprenticeships and degrees, to reach out to us there too.
Wonderful. And you have a podcast show as well? Do you want to talk a little bit about your show?
Sure. Happy to. Yeah, I had the great privilege to partner with Adam Grant, who I deeply admire, to build a podcast about that opportunity divide that we've been talking about, which is there's talent in every part of the United States. I believe that talent is equally distributed. And I believe that globally too. But opportunity, the way to climb those historical ladders, to now navigate these lattices that you and I have been talking about, that opportunity is pretty inequitably distributed. And so Adam and I decided to spend time and build this podcast as a project to take all the best thought leadership from folks like Brene Brown and Malcolm Gladwell and Ken Chenault and Daniel Pink and apply their practices around business and leadership and management, not just to the upper echelons of the corporate headquarters, but to bring it to the frontline workforce and the people who lead them, to think about how do we motivate and support and drive and prepare the 100 million Americans that we serve for this economy of tomorrow. So it was a total pleasure and joy to do. And it's brought me into this podcast world that you're in, that I'm really learning to love and finding a lot of joy in.
Yes, it's wonderful. I do love it. Thank you so much, Rachel, for being with us and sharing all your wisdom. I think it's going to be really inspiring to a lot of folks, that not only the work that you're doing, but even your take on the work that we're doing. I just really appreciate you being here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
What an impact she is making. I think we're going to have her back and ask her to share what's coming up with some of those new projects and work that she has going on. Want to go deeper with this content? Sign up for my newsletter. Go to our show site and you can leave us your email to subscribe to my newsletter and get exclusive content to help you live out what we talk about here. Did you like this episode? Take a moment right now and leave a review. Please share the show and encourage others to listen too. I believe small actions lead to big actions. Your review or sharing of this show will lead to big things for others. Remember, you are made for impact.